Chapter 25. Samuel the prophet dies. Samuel had been a very important leader of the Israelites. The Israelites trusted him as a leader and a prophet. They were very sad when he died. Samuel led them during a time of great change. He had anointed Saul as the first king of Israel. Then he anointed David as the king that God chose. Samuel did not see David become king. But in chapter 24, verse 20, Samuel had agreed that David would be the next king. Nabal insults David. David and his 600 men lived in the southern part of the country of Judah. There were many hills and mountains on those places. People called the land a desert because it was dry. Therefore, there was not much rain in that area. Not many people lived there because they could not grow crops on that land. Only grass and some small plants grew in those areas. The people who lived there kept sheep and goats. Each year, the farmers cut the wool of their animals. They sold the wool and paid their servants. Everyone was happy at this time. They usually had a party with plenty of food and drinks. David and his men had to find water and food every day. They could not plant their own crops because they had to keep moving to different places. Verses 7 and 16 show that they protected Nabal's men and animals in the desert. David and his men probably protected other people's animals too. Enemies from other countries near to Judah often came and stole from the Israelites. The farmers usually paid David and his men with food. This story is about a wicked man and his good wife. Nabal came from the family of Caleb. Caleb was an Israelite who left the country of Egypt with Moses. Only Caleb and Joshua went in the land that God had promised to the Israelites. Numbers chapter 14 and 15 and Joshua chapter 14 verses 16 to 15. Carmel is a town near the town of Hebron, Caleb's town. Saul went to Carmel in chapter 15 verse 12. David sent his young men to Nabal on the day that he had his special meal. David hoped that Nabal would be generous. The greeting in verse 6 is a typical Israelite greeting. In verse 8, David calls himself your son David. This means that David had been like a servant to Nabal. David gave Nabal honor because he was an important man. But Nabal insulted David. Nabal did not greet David's men quickly. Nabal pretended that he did not know David. But everyone who lived in the country of Judah knew who David was. Verse 10 shows that Nabal knew about David. He knew that David was a son of Jesse. Here, Nabal used the name son of Jesse as an insult, as Saul did in chapter 20 verse 27 and chapter 22 verse 13. Nabal knew that David had been one of Saul's servants. However, he described David as a bad slave who had run away. Nabal had prepared food for his servants, but he was selfish. This story shows that David was not a perfect man. David was angry with Nabal. David had protected Nabal's men and animals in the desert, but Nabal had not been generous to David and his men. So David went to punish Nabal and his family. David was a man who felt natural anger, but his reaction to Nabal contrasted with his reaction to King Saul. David was angry and wanted to kill Nabal. If David ever felt natural anger towards Saul, he controlled it. David would not hurt Saul because God had anointed him. Nabal's servant knew that David would be angry. They knew that Nabal was a wicked man. They were afraid that something bad would happen. Nabal would not listen to them. So they spoke to Abigail. Abigail was an intelligent woman. Verses 2 and 3. She acted very quickly. She knew that David and his men deserved to share Nabal's food. Abigail was generous, so she took enough food for a good meal for David and his men. Raisins and figs are the types of fruit that the sun has dried. They are sweet and give people energy. Abigail was a wise woman, so she did not tell Nabal what she was doing. She knew that he would have stopped her for doing good things. Abigail sent her servants ahead with the food. Perhaps she thought that she would be safer behind her servants. David was probably very surprised to see Abigail with her servants, donkeys, and all the food. Abigail acted quickly again. She had to stop 400 angry men before they killed anyone. Abigail behaved in a humble way when she bent down on her knees. She gave David her great respect and honor when she spoke to him. Abigail agreed that Nabal was a wicked man, but she appealed to David not to behave in a wrong way. She did not use her gift of food to persuade David. Instead, she reminded him to trust the Lord with full heart. The Lord would protect David, and the Lord would deal with David's enemies, including Nabal. Abigail knew that David would be the king of Israel. She did not want him to be guilty about anything. In verse 31, Abigail said, "When the Lord gives you success, please remember me." These words are similar to Joseph's in Genesis chapter 40, verse 14. David knew that God had sent Abigail to him. He accepted her wise advice and her present. David and his men got their meal. David trusted the Lord to deal with Saul, but David nearly made a mistake because of his wrong anger. The result of this would have been serious. God was kind to David and saved him. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 35 and Romans chapter 12 verse 17 to 21 say that God will deal with every wrong act. We must never punish people who hurt us. Instead, we must do good things to them. We should trust the Lord, who is a fair judge. Nabal dies. Nabal had prepared a huge meal. He did not notice that Abigail had taken some of his food. Abigail could not speak to Nabal that night. He was not sensible because he had drunk too much wine. In the morning, Nabal had a shock when he listened to Abigail. Verse 37 says, Nabal's heart failed. This means that he lost his courage. Exodus chapter 15 verse 16 says that God's enemy will be as still as a stone. This may be a picture language for death. Nabal died because the Lord punished him. Psalms 112 verse 5, Proverbs 11 chapter and verse 25 and chapter 22 verse 9 show that God blesses generous people. Nabal was not generous. God did not bless him, but Abigail was generous. David remembered her in verse 31 and he married her. Abigail gave David honor. She wanted to serve him and his servants too. Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 shows that God wants a man to have one wife. In those days, it was common for man to have more than one wife. This is still common in some countries even today. In the Old Testament, men would have more than one wife, often had troubles in their family. When David left Saul, David had to live apart from his wife Michal. So Saul found another husband for her. In verse 43, Jezreel is a town near Carmel. Ahinoam was the mother of David's first son, Amnon. In 2 Samuel chapter 3 verse 2.